Hi, and welcome to Creating Cadence, a podcast for life and work in motion. I'm your host, Mish Bondizio, a coach, consultant, and solo entrepreneur. I'm also the author of The Cadence Effect. I help high achievers working at the frontiers of making impactful change to transform their approach to life, work, and business, to avoid burnout and overwork, activate more potential, improve well-being and performance, and experience more joy in our work, at a cadence that's more sustainable for us, despite this fast-paced world we live in. This is episode 74, the third of season 12, published in February 2025. In this season, I'm talking to interesting people working both inside and outside of traditional sustainability sectors. We're talking about effective ways we can build more regenerative ways of working and doing business that support people, planet, and profit, whilst helping us to create cadence in our days and build momentum in our work lives. Today I'm chatting with Kyle Su, who is the Partnerships and Product Manager at B-Lab UK, which is the charity helping to raise awareness of the B Corp movement nationwide. Aside from being involved in B Corp, Kyle is also engaged in some interesting projects, and during the interview he covers a wide range of topics, from social design and social innovation and regenerative business, to storytelling, vulnerability, and even playing with Lego. But before we get to the interview, some thoughts and updates from me. So last week I hosted a flexible working webinar sharing simple productivity strategies to work more sustainably in 2025. And during that session, I also explored the idea of the 4-day work week. There were some excellent questions raised in the Q&A afterwards, and I also received lovely feedback that is now helping me to turn this content into a lunchtime CPD talk session for businesses. So if this is of interest, you can drop me a line at hello@creatingcadence.co. Now, I've been talking a lot lately about sustainable productivity because current global stress-inducing events and constant digital distractions are making it even tougher for us to focus and work effectively. So recently, I've been experimenting with a mental performance shot called Magic Mind that's really helped me with managing my attention and stress. You take it about 5 minutes before focused work, and it's designed for quick absorption and slow release, and you'll find that the effects build over time. So for me personally, what I found was that by day 4 of taking it, I was more alert. By day 5, I had steady energy all day and better sleep, something that I usually struggle with. On day 6, despite a very stressful long day, I got 3 hours of editing done in 2 and I stayed calm. And by day 7, I was getting 2 deep work sessions done in a day, when I can usually only handle 1. So I'm happy with the results and I've decided to continue with it. Now, Magic Mind has 12 high-quality nootropic and adaptogenic ingredients. These are things like matcha, lion's mane, and ashwagandha, plus vitamins C and D. And the bonus is that it tastes delicious. I also love that the company supports mental health charities, and they're 100% carbon neutral. If you want to try Magic Mind, use my magic code, CreatingC20, for up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase. Head to magicmind.com/creatingC20 to get your special offer. So, other things I've been up to, I'm also in week 3 of participating in a positive intelligence training program, which has been fascinating. There's been a lot of interesting and sometimes uncomfortable reflections coming up as part of the learning and transformation that we're experiencing as a group. But the bonus is that the skills I build as part of this program are going to help me with my clients in the future. Lastly, if you listen to the last episode with Zoe Detko, you'll know that I'm currently doing the Chamber Low Carbon B Impact Academy workshop program. I'm doing this to help me on my own journey towards B Corp certification. And although it's a lot of work, as someone who purposefully works as a company of one, it's good to have this weekly in-person community-focused support that helps me make progress on working through my impact assessment, which I might not be able to do quite so quickly if I was trying to do this all on my own. So that's all my news for this week. Let's get on to the interview. Kyle Su is the Partnerships and Product Manager at B-Lab UK, the charity helping to raise awareness of the B Corp movement nationwide. A criminal lawyer for almost 10 years, Kyle is now exploring how business can be used as a force for good, with a particular focus on combining design, facilitation, and storytelling to create networks and communities in service of people and the planet. He is a design council expert, Lego Serious Play facilitator, and also runs the popular Peshakucha Nights in his home city of Manchester. As you'll hear, Kyle is a deep and conscientious thinker who cares immensely about people and the planet. He shares important thoughts about the challenges that we face and some tools we may be able to use to help us find our way through these challenges. Kyle covers an array of topics, from the legacy of extractive business practices to using social design, innovation, and play to address current issues. He also touches on the impact that destabilizing external events can have on our internal world, as well as the importance of storytelling, vulnerability, and accountability in helping us to become better people and citizens. Also, please note, we do talk about mental health conditions and therapies that support them. I have included some resources in the show notes in case you or someone you know is struggling with something similar. So if you're ready, let's dive into this thought-provoking conversation with Kyle Hsu. Hi, Kyle. Welcome to the Creating Cadence podcast. It's lovely to have you on the show.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Great. So before we get started, some context for my listeners. I first heard you speak as part of an event called Stories Worth Hearing, hosted in Manchester by an innovation company called Magnetic in March 2024. Then I got to chat to you at the B Corp Festival that was held at the Wellbeing Farm in Lancashire in June 2024. And that event is what finally cemented my intention of starting my B Corp journey, which I am now on. So meeting you there led me to following you on LinkedIn, where you often share very thought-provoking posts on a whole host of topics. And as part of that, I was delighted to discover that you're also a Lego Serious Play facilitator. I'm a huge fan of that methodology, having attended sessions as a participant and experiencing firsthand the transformation that it can help to unlock. But aside from those two roles, you also do loads of other things, and I'd like to delve into all of those things more during our conversation. But first, let's start with the here and now. Tell us more about your current context. Where do you find yourself in your life and work at this moment?
Yeah, thank you for that and the summary. I kind of feel LinkedIn has naturally become a bit of a home for me at the moment, in this sort of bio of these different things that I'm doing in life as well. So it's always interesting to kind of get the external perspective in terms of kind of what lands for other people as well. So I think for me, I don't like necessarily answer these questions around like, what do you do? Because I think this idea of being sort of defined by your job title is kind of a bit reductive. And so for me, I've been trying to explore kind of what's the guiding thread or the golden thread in terms of my being and the direction of travel at the moment. I think it centers around this question about why people come together, how people come together and do what they do. And so what are the systems, the structures, the rules and rituals that guide those relationships? And it's kind of been a bit of an obsession. And when I look back over my life, sort of from school through university, I've always been interested in these kinds of systems as well. So I did a lot of politics at university and got really obsessed with trying to write the constitution for our law society. And because it's like, this is how we govern each other and things like that. And also sort of geeking out on like political systems and stuff like that. So there's kind of been a bit of a historical experience for me about this, which is kind of manifested in these questions today. And so you talk about Lego Serious Play as one of those examples where there's opportunity for people to come together and learn and listen to each other. And so that's kind of one of the exploratory angles I've got at the moment on that. But I think kind of coming back to it, so currently I work at B-Lab UK, which is a home of the B Corp movement, as you mentioned. And I think in that space, it's continue that exploration in terms of how people come together in a business context, because it's such an important, dominant part of our lives. And again, in that space where we join as employees and as leaders, what kind of guides that decision making in terms of what we do in terms of developing products and services, how we convene as organizations, and then outwardly in terms of what we do to kind of work in this economic system, and then the challenges that brings about in terms of some of the more extractive practices in terms of people and planet, and then the effects that has in terms of the direction of travel we're going in the future, which feels quite dark and quite dangerous. And I think for me, I'm obsessed with this question about what can we do to support that behavior change for the future, but critically what we can do from today to practice those behaviors, not wait for some far-flung point in the future when everything becomes this utopian existence. What can we do from today to modify our own behaviors, how we interact with each other, and how we sort of manifest to our organizations to be better?
That's fascinating. I love your approach. Thank you for sharing. So Kyle, you clearly juggle a lot of things. I get the impression that you are a super curious person. I'm a bit like that too. And it's easy to find ourselves taking on more than what our energy levels can sometimes handle in our pursuit for learning and doing as part of feeding and appeasing that curiosity. One of the 4 pillars of intentional productivity, which is my framework for creating cadence that I use with my clients, is about building strong foundations around self-care, both inside and outside of work, that support our creativity, productivity, and well-being, so we can be more resilient and sustain over the long haul with less chance of falling prey to things like burnout. That said, I think burnout can also be more prevalent in people who are purpose-driven and mission-led, because we feel the imperative of the mission deeply, and that sense of urgency that time's running out means that we try to keep going and try to do all the things. You've spoken on LinkedIn a few times this past year about overwhelm and overload and experiencing signs of burnout yourself. What challenges do you experience with maintaining those foundations, and what regular or daily activities, rituals, routines, and hobbies are you finding help you to support your well-being and performance better?
Yes, this is an area of active exploration for me because I've definitely not nailed it, and appreciate the summary then. I think, the conclusion I've come to so far, just kind of like the working hypothesis, which kind of bouncing off what you said a bit, is the energy expenditure in dancing between 2 different systems. And so we live in an existing world at the moment, which is very much focused on, progression, promotion, individualism, trying to hustle your way through. Obviously, the classic kind of LinkedIn memes about this, you wake up at 4 a.m. and you sort of go to the gym for 2 hours and then all this kind of stuff. And it's that kind of culture which is coming out more recently, as people say, taking pride in the fact that they don't take lunch.
Yeah, it's crazy.
and things like that. And it's like this kind of macho way of being is still quite prevalent. And it feels distasteful for me, but equally that is the system as is. And if you disconnect from that, you don't necessarily progress. And I think we live in a world where we need to continue to earn and learn and develop. And if you don't play the game, you kind of get left by the wayside. And so that's what I'm sort of grappling with in terms of how my life's developing and going forward, and feeling the necessity and urgency to kind of keep up in terms of just frankly how much money's coming into the bank account and things like that. And so I've never necessarily had to grapple with that because I've been in a fortunate position, sort of moving into the world of law after university and things like that, to be comfortable, but recognizing that as time goes on, it's the gap is becoming increasingly bigger. And so that's where I find I need to expend more energy to play that game. But equally, as you were talking before about in the mission-driven space, that obsession, I'm going to use that word deliberately, the obsession with the question of how we do things better and work differently, is also incredibly intensive, because I find contrast, ironically, to being a lawyer when I could do a 9-to-5 existence in the civil service. I'm always, always, always switched on in this space. Everything is relevant when you're trying to do economic systems change. Everything is of interest. And so that relentless curiosity is almost like being exposed to this kind of plethora of different inputs. And I think that's quite challenging, is knowing when to dampen, to switch off, to reflect, pause, breathe. And so that's something I'm sort of trying to grapple with. And you talk about the word cadence, so that's something I'm still trying to figure out. And I find that I go through these cyclical patterns with this, where I'll get to that point of just crashing and needing to reset. And I kind of felt, I get to that stage where, it comes because I've overloaded too much rather than being a bit more intentional with it. And so I think that's something I'm sort of trying to explore practically in terms of what I've been trying to do better. I started a yoga practice just pre-pandemic and trying to keep that up more regularly in terms of sort of the exercise and the being in that space as well. I don't necessarily do things like meditation, probably should do a bit more, but I find yoga is that kind of combination of the active and the reflective, which resonates with me as well. And I think the second thing I would say, which I've been trying to practice more, is that space of being in community with other people. And so I have been running some experiments over the past year where I open up an appointment slot for anyone to reach out to me to have a conversation every couple of weeks, and I actually find those spaces where I'm meeting strangers to be really powerful points of again, reflection, because people ask me about my story and it just forces me to think back. And I find that actually that's quite useful. It makes sense of all these different dangling threads of my life. And so I find actually the practice of conversation, not knowing the answer, feeling around the edges with other people has been quite nourishing.
That's a great word to describe it. And I love what you've shared there. Social interaction is a form of active rest. It's been proven to help with stress management, and also what you were describing there about reflecting on your journey and where you are and what you're doing. In a way, it becomes a form of gratitude practice and realizing, what we have. And again, that is another way to support our well-being. So great examples there. Thank you. Let's talk a bit more about your career journey so far and the shift towards supporting sustainable business and meaningful, impactful work. You started as a lawyer, as you mentioned. What prompted the shift from doing that to a focus on B Corp? And at what point did Lego Serious Play? And we haven't spoken yet about your role with organizing Manchester's Peshakusha sessions. At what point did all of those come about and why?
Yes, I always find there's a degree of sort of retrospective coherence when I look at these particular things, and it all sort of seems to fall into place and make sense. So I think it's very much with a lot of these things, it's just feeling and dancing around the edges, and then everything seems to make sense. So when I look back, actually, it kind of feels like there's quite a good narrative pattern there. So I think I'll probably rewind very briefly back to my time at university. And I mentioned I did law of politics. I did one of those quizzes at school, which tells you what job you should do. And I'm the only person who actually took it seriously. So I had back in year 8 this plan to probably go into architecture because I love creativity and making things and building things. And when I did that little quiz, it said, "Oh, be a lawyer." And I was like, "Oh, this pays well. I'm going to do that." So that dominated my life for a long time. And I don't regret it in any particular way. It was interesting to me intellectually. It combined the logic, the storytelling, I suppose the ego, certainly within that. And as I was going down that journey, I discovered politics, and I talked a bit before about the governance systems and how we operate and come together. And I was actually quite fascinated by that side of things, which prompted me to do law of politics at university in Manchester, because it combined sort of the legal side and also the political side, and just exploring again those questions about different political systems, how historically we've grown and developed as in different countries, and how we interrelate. And off the back of that, I worked at the Serious Fraud Office. So I applied to work in the civil service as part of their kind of, it was almost like fast stream for lawyer kind of program, because I thought, well, actually, I really like law, I really like politics, where best to go, where you see these very large subjects come together. And so I was expecting to kind of go and work in a constitutional department and looking at like those questions about electoral systems and things like that. And I found myself working at the Serious Fraud Office in criminal law, which I always found slightly ironic because criminal law is my worst mark at university. But I found it was quite a fascinating place to be, because it combined, practically in terms of how the Serious Fraud Office is set up, it combined kind of an investigatory function and a prosecutorial function, which is quite unique in the UK system, because usually you've got investigatory elements, which is typically the police, prosecutorial, which is usually the CPS, and the two organisations are separate. And back in the 80s, there was a report which suggested actually for serious complex fraud, bribery cases, because of their size, magnitude and complexity, having both in one department made sense. And so I got to do interesting things like go on searches of properties. I got to interview victims, witnesses and suspects, and also get to build up cases, which are multi-year cases, which are quite impactful on society. And so that kind of guided 10 years of my life going through that process. But I found increasingly, as I was in that role, that it was sitting incongruently with my life as is. And I think really the point that changed everything was probably around 2015, 2016, when there's a multitude of different factors. I actually kind of broke this down into a broken head, a broken heart, and a broken hand. And so I was beginning to reconcile much more with my mental health state and stress and anger management, which kind of came to a head when I punched a wardrobe in frustration once and fractured my hand. And also there's a breakdown of my relationship. And so all of these different turbulent factors were coming in. And I really felt at that moment, I need to think, why did I react in that way, to have that moment of aggression? and why wasn't I able to stop myself? And so I went in and did cognitive behavior therapy, started to reconcile with the fact that I was exhibiting an OCD behaviors, which were becoming increasingly debilitating as I was getting more stressed and work. And so I needed that point to stop. And so at the same time, I was beginning to explore different things like doing Pechakucha and events. And around 2016, politically, we see Brexit, we see Trump. So societally, things were becoming destabilized and turbulent for me personally, anyway, in my reflection. So these multitude of factors forced me to stop. And so I applied for and began a social innovation course called Year Here. And this was the moment when the design, the creativity side started to kind of seep back into my life because I was drawn to it quite naturally. So I wanted to do something that would have meaning, would have societal impact, and respond to the challenges that we were seeing in day-to-day life. And through that course, which was a 10-month course, which I could dive into a bit more detail, I learned about things like design, service design, social innovation. I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. It's like using creativity to try and tackle societal issues. And so I was just exposed to this whole new sort of vista of ways of being. And I realized when I was, after that time and going back to law, I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. So even though I was at the Serious Fraud Office and was tackling bad business, I was actually exposed to what good business could be. And so I really became obsessed with this idea of going in to become a service designer and using design as a tool for good and building up that facilitation practice at the same time as well. So that's where Lego Serious Play starts to come into the fore, because I really like Lego and I really like the idea of bringing people together to explore these challenges. And so I was like, oh, actually, you can actually use Lego to build better teams. I was like, I'm going to do that course. So I did that.
Oh, that's fascinating. Could you tell me a little bit more about I'm interested to know more about the course that you did.
Oh, Year Here.
Year Here, there we go.
Yeah. So the idea behind it was set up by a guy called Jack Graham, who had this insight that a lot of young people would be finishing university, going into the world of work, but before doing that, they would do a gap year. And usually they go off to a far-flung place in the world, which is dealing with a lot of issues, and would give up their time. So it'd be build a school, build a well, those kinds of things. And he thought, well, actually, in the UK, there are still a lot of challenges. We've not nailed this. So how and why are we not channeling that energy to expose people to these very real challenges on our doorstep and try and build that empathy and also innovate to create solutions to alleviate some of those challenges? It's a great program. It's, for me, quite transformational as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'll share a link to that in the show notes along with the other things we've spoken about so far. All right, let's dive a little bit more into the notion of sustainable business and your role with B Corp. Now, sustainable business can mean different things for different people, and a term linked to sustainable business that I reference often as part of my work is the idea of the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, and how they're interlinked. Another term for this is ESG, or environmental, social, and governance principles in business. There's a lot of focus on the environmental challenges that businesses need to address, and I'm not denying that this is obviously a critical component in our fight to save the planet and to future-proof our businesses, but it's not a standalone factor. So from your perspective, working with B Corp, why do you think this idea of the triple bottom line is so important for businesses, particularly in our current social and economic landscape?
So yeah, there's so many different terms, acronyms in this space. It can be quite overwhelming. So to throw another one out there, the mission statement for the B Corp movement is trying to push the economic system to one that is regenerative, inclusive, and equitable. And I think for me, that word regenerative is the word that I link to, particularly because I think contained within it, which is sort of part of this deeper exploration I'm going personally, is just these different questions about how we are with each other, ourselves, and with the world at large. And this idea of, I suppose, being inspired by the cycles of nature and how living systems operate as well in this space. And I think in some of the discourse around this, which I think is fundamental, is beginning to reconcile that the the world as is has built in a particular way that's brought tremendous benefits in terms of sort of health, technology, but have come at a cost, and reconciling those particular costs, particularly for people and the planet and the voiceless within that space.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the counter to a lot of the world as is built on colonial extractive practices to kind of burn through the energy to kind of sustain its existence as is. And I think we don't necessarily take into account the externalities and the cost of those. And I think for me, part of this work is reconciling that and trying to figure out how we can better live without necessarily being as extractive as we are. Because if we keep going through this cycle, which is continuing to consume, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we're kind of on a road to collapse. And I think that's for me is the existential point, which I'm grappling with again as a personal level, as a being, as a citizen within this space, but also how we encourage those changes, particularly when we are trapped in a very real context and multiple stories about how to be. And I think that for me is a important part of the exploration. Is going back to my original kind of point, is we know a lot of our behaviors lead to these particular problems, but we still do it anyway. And I think I've summarized this into kind of this year's question, which is, why don't we practice what we preach?
Mm-hmm.
And I think examining it sort of the multiple levels, like, I know I should be going to the gym more, I should have more of these practices, but I still don't. And so, at an individual level, if you find it really hard, how we expect to do that within our relationships, with our organizations, teams, and at a societal level as well. And I kind of feel when you start to add in these extra things, we are in ourselves complex living beings with, multiple living things within ourselves, in our gut. We're a multitude of living things working in concert and coherence. But when we start to magnify that outwards in terms of the nested systems which we're operating, it just becomes so overwhelming. So it's unsurprising that it's so hard and so intractable, but change does happen. And so I think trying to find those kind of points of opportunity to change the gradient, to make things that are better, more desirable to happen, and dampen and constrain and stop what is quite debilitating behaviors, is kind of part of the work I'm trying to explore in kind of the complexity space as well.
Very interesting. I appreciate your answer because it touches on so many of the different elements that influence why we do or don't make change, from values to being in our comfort zone, to very often we don't make change until the pain of staying where we are is worse than the pain of making that change. But there are actually other ways that we can make change that are more pleasurable, and finding ways to kind of connect those things so that it doesn't feel like it has to be such a hard thing to do. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I find in my response, I've kind of zoomed up to this kind of like theoretical guiding thing. And I think for me, one of the challenges in this space is I have the privilege of being able to think about this and have these conversations. But really when it sort of translates down to the business, again, we're trapped in a context where if we stop to pause and think, we lose money, we lose time. And so there's a very real existence for business owners, for workers, where we just can't think about and contemplate these particular things because we're considering, like, where's the next meal coming from? When's the next paycheck? How are we going to make these payments? How are we going to make sure that our kids and relatives are kept alive, frankly? And I think that's the challenge with these things, because we're kind of on this hamster wheel moving ever faster, and we can't afford to stop. But if we keep going like this, then everything will fall apart. So that for me is the intractability of this thing. It's like, how do we translate some of these deeper questions to the everyday and sort of expose people to opportunities, to different ways of being? And I think that's where the B Corp movement is an interesting one in terms of the mission of the organization, of the movement, of what we're trying to demonstrate to business leaders, to employees and other stakeholders, is there is a better way of being and doing these things, which you can do. It's going to be hard, but there are easy steps you can make on that journey to making those small tweaks and embed the idea of continuous improvement. So over time, you can get that, Atomic Habits standard thing, like 1% better each day kind of thing. And then hopefully that will see that graduated shift over time.
Yeah. And there's lots of different ways, as you say, that you can implement small change that will ultimately have incremental and powerful effects. And that's something I talk about and do a lot as well as part of my work with Creating Cadence. It is around creating the space so that we have the time to think and create and do in a different way.
Yes.
And one of those ways is around kind of flexible working. And that's another way where businesses can potentially be more regenerative and sustainable, is whether that's a 4-day work week or, there's heaps of different ways you can do this, but this is something that I'm quite fascinated about at the moment. All right. So we've touched on this a little bit, but I have a question around it. This concept of creating cadence is also about finding ways to move forward, to build that momentum, to create more flexible rhythm and flow in all parts of our life and work in a way that creates deeper meaning and can help us sustain over the long haul. So how does what you do in your role help your clients for B Corp or through Lego Serious Play, etc., to create more momentum in their lives and business in a way that's more impactful, meaningful, and long-lasting?
Yeah, I think I wanted to sort of bounce off a point you just made before, and also kind of in the reading for this podcast preparation. I found that sort of the difference between balance and cadence really, really resonated for me, because I found actually, the model I had in my head was sort of trying to sort of like balance these scales, and it's actually not serving me very helpful. So actually, cadence sort of appeals to me much more when I was sort of thinking about rhythmic patterns, the dance of these things as well, and the fact that each day is going to be different, even within a day, things are going to be different as well. So I just wanted to sort of say at the outset, I found that very helpful. And I think the other thing is saying, just bouncing off what you were saying before, is I think a classic phrase which I'm going to mangle, which I think is, to go far, you got to slow down or something like that. But it's essentially like it feels counterintuitive that you actually, to go further and farther, you stop. And I think that there's sort of practical things we've been exploring within our organization about that, and sort of trying to take our foot off the pedal and sort of get away from that frenetic pace and take that space to pause, reflect, to question, to learn, and get a sense of that direction of travel, which I think is really helpful. And it's been useful and interesting to be in an organization like B-Lab UK, which is, I joined probably when there's about less than 15 employees, and now it's up to 40.
Wow.
So actually going through that growth of an organization as we sort of start to move from kind of effect like startup to scale up or mature organization, how we do that with so many different people. And so it's been interesting to see in terms of what process mechanisms we put in place around that. I think you touched upon the Lego Serious Play side of these things. And I think it is, again, creating those moments of pause and reflection as well. I find sometimes I have to battle with would-be clients because they want to do Lego Serious Play. They want to do this fun, novel, interesting thing, but they want to do it in an hour. They've not got time to do any more of this. And I sort of have to insist. I even say, like, I'll bolt an extra half an hour. I'm not going to charge you for it, but I want to do a half day for these things because we're in this frenetic space, and this idea that you can create moments of connection, reflection, and sort of trot it out in an hour, and that's it, kind of feels we're veering into silver bullet territory.
Yeah.
And so what I try and say when I speak to would-be clients with these things is it's just managing expectations. You're not going to have this mass epiphany in an organization and walk away that you've done that bit, you've done the team building stuff and go back to business as usual. The labored metaphor I've been using is around going to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go to the gym for one 45-minute session, walk out with a six-pack. You have to work at it. You've got to sustain it. It's a practice. And I think also it's moving beyond seeing a six-pack as a goal and actually having the goal or the outcome as being healthier. And I think building in that practice and recognizing the system change you would need to make. It's not just going to the gym, it's how you eat, how you sleep, etc., which hopefully over time starts to see those results obliquely. And so that's where I want to sort of frame Lego Serious Play is it's an important point. It might be a catalyst moment, but it's not the moment. And for organizations, they need to kind of keep that as a sustained practice over time as well. So that's what I would say is like it's taking that moment to pause and reflect, which is critical, and using as a starting point for working better. I think the other thing I'll just add into the mix here, which is just that moment of relating to one another. And I don't think we do this enough. And I think what's beautiful about Lego Serious Play, and just as a quick primer for people who don't know, it's getting people in teams of around 6 max to have Lego in front of them as well. I will ask them a question, which will be kind of a challenging question, but also one that people can grapple with. So it might be like, what is your superpower? People will build their answer in Lego in 2-3 minutes, and then each person around the table has 2 minutes to share that story. And then at the end, people capture it. And I think that ability to build your response activates the sort of the tactility elements, constructionism in terms of people building with their hands and externalizing thought processes. But the critical moment is that storytelling point. People are given an opportunity democratically to talk about their experiences for a couple of minutes. And I think that's a really powerful moment for a lot of people, because oftentimes some people are stifled and can't speak. And I think that moment can be quite emotional for people, actually, as they start to share their stories. Emotional for them, but also emotional for people hearing it as well. And that is really powerful for building those essential connections for us as kind of colleagues, as friends as well.
I agree. It's a revelatory experience. One thing that happened in the group that I was a part of, one of the gentlemen right up front was so obvious in vociferously stating, I am not creative. I am not a creative person. He didn't want to be there. The bricks he chose were all grey. And when he started building and then started explaining his thought process behind what he was building, it was absolutely magical to see how he came out of his shell, how he described things in such a fantastic way that we could all relate to. And he left feeling like a different person. It was just incredible.
Yeah. I love those stories. I feel the saddest sentence I hear from people is, I am not creative. I was like, what has happened in that person's life that something has happened which has stripped that creativity? Because you never hear a kid say, I'm not creative.
Yeah.
And that there's something that just gets battered out of us as we go through. I don't know if it's a combination of education, the workplace, growing up, which just removes that creativity. And it feels like when you look at like these various reports that come out about like what's the workplace of the future, creativity is at the top. And so I think a lot of the work that I do as a facilitator is sort of nipping that in the bud and just saying that everybody has the capacity to be creative. Everything everyone does every single day is creative.
Yeah.
You know, a mother trying to look after their kid and again, dancing around the trials and tribulations of that is creativity in a very real setting. So I think what probably I suspect people say, I can't draw, therefore I'm not creative. And I think it's just expanding the definition and sort of giving that opportunity, that practice for people to come to that realization themselves. But I think, yeah, there's those kind of stories abound where people come to that epiphany point that they are creative. And I think that's such a critical and lovely moment.
Yeah, I agree. It's great that you get to see that as part of the work you do. All right, Kyle, this brings me to my final question for you. What words of advice or key lessons would you like to share with my listeners based on your experience of life and work so far?
My immediate thought is be more vulnerable. I think kind of as a good accompaniment to that point about reflection, what I've tried to practice more in this space in terms of people I work with is just being a bit more upfront in terms of what's playing in my mind and what's the kind of contributing factors in terms of what and how I'm showing up in a particular day. So I think that practice is helpful because I think it just unlocks this ability to sort of forgive oneself, etc. And also I think just creates much more of a better playing field in terms of how we relate to each other as well. And I think kind of commensurate with that as well is it's just being open to putting your hands up and say, like, I've not had a good day today. I've not shown up in the best way as possible, apologizing for that and just trying to be a better citizen with each other as well. So that's something I've tried to model and practice a bit more. And I think hopefully through that, you'll have greater empathy and sort of deeper, more meaningful relationships with each other. I think at the moment I'm quite interested in exploring. So there's another course I'll do is around like nonviolent communication. And I think from my explorations into that space, I kind of feel the process of describing something objectively and how it makes you feel is very helpful as a mechanism to practice myself in terms of how I relate to other people, but also when I observe these things, and we live in a world, and particularly in our movement, where we can see things that we don't necessarily agree with. And I don't think as a muscle, we exercise enough that ability to have discourse with each other when we don't agree. And I think that these kind of mechanisms, these tricks, these lessons about how to step away from the immediate emotional side of these things and see that somebody has a viewpoint, you might not disagree with it, but they've got their valid opinion, and they'll navigate that kind of conversation, is essential as a counter to a lot of the polarizing debates that we're seeing. And I feel that's a practice I want to develop a bit more. And I would urge other people to, if I may, to kind of consider that themselves and where they feel they show up in these different interactions, and just recognize that there's probably ways that we could all be better as we speak to each other.
Work in progress. I like what you've suggested there. Thank you. All right, Kyle, thanks for that. Where can people find you online, and do you have anything interesting coming up?
Well, I live on LinkedIn, so I think, connecting with me on there, I occasionally, as you'll have seen, write week notes where I sort of try and dump my thoughts externally and publicly. And I feel, again, that's that practice of being vulnerable, asking questions, asking for help is really, really powerful to untangle the messiness of my mind. But also I think it's trying to create those points of resonance for other people. So I think that's where I'm showing up most at the moment. I think in terms of what's kind of on the horizon, we're in the midst of an exploration at the moment. Me and a couple of other LEGO Serious Play facilitators and people are working in the impact space, where we're getting experimental. So the idea of LEGO Serious Play is that it's a powerful tool. We've discussed that, and we want to sort of see if it's got application in other spaces as well. So a few of us are quite interested in 3 horizons modeling and sort of exploring how we can sort of see or get a sense of what's emerging, which might become sort of future trends in terms of better ways of being, what's already in existence at the moment, and what kind of elements of the existing system might be dying off. And exploring 3 horizons using play-based methods is something of an experiment, which is quite exciting for us to see. So hopefully at some point we'll report back on our findings, but it seems like other people are willing to join us on this journey. So we've got a workshop coming up soon with that.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds very exciting, and I wish you well with it. Kyle, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed listening to Kyle's thoughts on the role we can play in incrementally creating systemic change, both as individuals and collectively in our communities and in business. One quote in particular that stuck with me is this description Kyle used to explain the example of how the bacteria in our gut work together to support our health and well-being. He said, "We are a multitude of living beings working in concert and coherence." I often talk on the Creating Cadence podcast about how in our minds we think we're separate from our external worlds. And what I mean in this case is the natural environment. In some cases, we think we are above it or in control of it, but we are an integrated part or element of these natural ecosystems. Our actions and decisions impact them, and their degradation impacts on us. So if the elements of our internal world can work in concert and coherence to help us function properly and stay healthy, why can't we help our external environment to do the same? So thanks for listening. In the next episode, I'll be talking to Rashmir Balasubramaniam, who is a leadership, team, and strategy coach and advisor who works with founders, philanthropists, and changemakers. A few things before you go. Firstly, don't forget about the limited offer for Magic Mind that gets you up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off one-time purchases with the code CREATINGC20 at checkout. You can claim this offer using the following magic link, magicmind.com/creatingc20. Link in the show notes. If you like the show, please share the love by rating it where you listen to it and telling all your friends. You can find out more about what I do at creatingcadence.co, and you can buy my book at thecadenceeffect.com. If you're interested in being a sponsor for the podcast and you have a product or service that aligns with the ethos of Creating Cadence, intentional productivity, or flexible, sustainable working practices, then drop us a line at hello@creatingcadence.co. The podcast is hosted on Acast and available wherever you listen to your pods. It's edited on Descript, auto-posted to YouTube with Headliner, and the current groovy podcast music track is 184 by Skittle from Blue Dot Sessions. Until next time, keep moving forwards with courage, curiosity, and cadence. Bye for now.